see a Victorian house with a log addition on the side. It's kind of a conversation starter. It makes the building kind of interesting. You know, the fact that it's this incongruity, these two buildings mashed together. I don't find it necessarily a deal buster to you know, it's an interesting thing. It happened, and you know, it's reality. So I would embrace it and try to make it as good as I could do.
It's a good teaching moment for your guests.
Well, that was my opinion was, does it tell a story? And if so, what story does it tell about Idaho Springs and the construction at the time? And I had a question, maybe not germane to our decision or anything, but is it a log building on the interior? In other words, are the logs open face on the interior, or is it not? Is it covered up?
Is it covered?
Is it covered?
So yeah, it's paneled. We got paneling on the interior of the main area, up where the roof line is. Those kind of timbers that make up the pattern of the roof line are exposed on the interior. So when you're inside the building, what you see is paneling. Once we get all the walls out of the way, there'll be the paneling about 8 feet, maybe 10 feet up. And then it meets with the roof line, where you'll see kind of the whole pine timber design. And then also the timbers that kind of are like the structure of the roof. Those are also the same type of wood as well.
Does the wood paneling appear to be original, or was that a finish that was applied over the face of the logs at some point in the past?
I mean, it would be hard to say. I mean, obviously it's there, and everything that was built in there was definitely kind of constructed over top of it. So they haven't been moved, at least in the last 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
The other point I would argue is, if it was a metal structure that was built on and added to the side of a building, and that they used for some form of purpose to create a building that was for a dining room, for example, or a stone block, you know, building, would we be having the same discussion? If it looked like crap, would we be arguing about their wanting to change it? So,
or tear it off.
Yeah, or tear it off. So I think there's credence to both arguments, and so I haven't made up my mind yet, to be real honest with you, because for me, would we be still having this discussion if it was made out of cinder blocks?
I think we would. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess, I mean, I have a question for you, that what's the cost difference between option 1 and option 2? Is one prohibitive in comparison to the other?
We don't have that information fully fleshed out yet. Obviously, the logs are going to need to be repaired. There are several of the logs on the kind of bottom that are really close to the ground or touching the ground that are going to have to be pulled out and repaired. Most likely, there's going to have to be some work done because trying to match that up or make that look proper to the rest of the logs is going to be an interesting challenge, that there's some work that we have to do around that. Obviously, we have Travis do both options based on, you know, conversations that we had during our initial introduction. But I would say, as far as easy concept to imagine, you know, putting the cladding siding to cover up the logs is, you know, we know what that solution looks like. We know kind of how the structure is going to work in order to make that happen to some extent. So, I mean, it's just a matter of trying to have deeper conversations with the contractors and get some pricing nailed down now, once we kind of get some direction.
So I have a question about the overall scheme of this the log building, if you're going to be cladding the exterior, does that mean you're going to be cladding all the interior logs that are exposed on the interior as well?
No, it's just in the ceiling, and they're gonna expose that vaulted ceiling and continue it, and so there's nothing exposed that we can see on the interior right now. To jump into the cost thing though, there are a couple layers, the logs being the only structure, and there not being any kind of membrane layer or insulative layer in the structure, means that they have to replace some that are on the bottom, especially on the alley side, which is pretty cost prohibitive. But there's also the idea that if we fur out and clad this, we have an opportunity to develop a rain screen and make this actually thermally sound and moisture tight again. So we have a long-term benefit to the life cycle of the entire structure to start meeting some levels of energy efficiency that just are not available with an 8-inch log wall that has, from what we can tell, the paneling is just attached to the inside. The thickness of the wall does not imply that there was any type of furring or anything like that, which actually makes me think that the paneling is older. Because, if this was done in the last 40 or 50 years, somebody's going to have a furring strip or hat channel or, some sort of wood system versus what they have in there right now. So I think there's a lot of benefits, honestly, to the life cycle of this building by going this route as well. But, obviously we don't talk about it as much because we're trying to talk about the history stuff. But I do think that in the long run, it might be a little bit extra for the siding versus paint, but we can't think of it in that way. We have to think about total life cycle here, and it's kind of an exponential cost if we keep it just log.
Are you bothered by the possible dichotomy of the interior being a log building and the outside being Victorian? Because that bothers me a lot.
Yeah, like the interior is not log. If it was treated in a way on the interior to embrace that log, but to me, I just see efficiency in material at a certain time, it was non-contributing, and it's not in this area. It falls into this weird gray area of determination. So, to me as an architect, and I don't specialize in historic preservation. I just happen to do a lot of it for some reason. But it's just like, to me, I see a situation where we have somebody did something based on cost, and we're trying to make this all better in a lot of ways. And there's a certain level of restoration and recreation going on here. And there is wiggle room in the Secretary of Interior to actually kind of recreate something in a similar manner. It's called recreation. It's what we did at Larimer Square in downtown Denver. There was things that have been done that were changed or recreated at that time. So, there is wiggle room there, and I think in the guidelines, and I think big picture, that option one, I really do feel like, it challenges this gray area in a little bit of a, and I know that's not fun to make a determination on. So sorry to have the big project to discuss, but yeah, anyway, I'm rambling, so I'll mute myself.
Yeah, no, that's my next question is, what is your timeline to actually come before us to get a certificate of appropriateness? Or are you thinking in a month, 2 months, 6 months?
That would be in June, the June 15th meeting.
Okay.
We're working and preparing and obviously appreciating the preliminary feedback here and be able to turn that around for a full application for the June meeting.
Okay.
Yeah,
Can I ask
Jonah?
one last question? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Only because I'm not an architect, so I just want a little more clarification. Are you saying, and I guess this is more to Travis or to Jonah, are you saying if you have to repair the logs, it will be some sort of different repair based on just doing the logs versus doing the cladding, because you have to do different types of restoration for structural purposes. I'm just looking for some clarification on that.
Yeah, there's a couple boards that are rotting out. The logs themselves are rotting out, and they're all at the bottom of the structure. So, if this is still the visible skin, it's going to be a lot harder to replace that. If we're cladding over top of this, there would be some treatment to make sure that it's structurally sound, and we'll have a structural engineer looking at it next week. But we also don't have to worry about the aesthetic of the log of trying to blend in some new material there as well. So, I mean, it's almost impossible to replace an entire 30-foot log at the bottom of a building that's rotting out. And big picture, to make that seamless is difficult.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
Oh, I've got a question for Jonah and his wife. Are you planning on applying for state or federal historic preservation tax credits for your project?
But she's been looking into that. So.
Yeah, we've been looking into that. We don't know yet because there's some issue with passive income and some other financial issues that we're looking into to see if it's even worth our while. So
Yeah, they tend to prefer the nonprofit.
well, no, the nonprofits are for the grants, but it's more about the passive income that we'll have from the building and whether or not that income can even be offset by this kind of tax credit.
Okay. We can pretty much guarantee that if you were to go with option one, you can throw the idea of tax credits out the window because they're in clear violation of the Secretary of the Interior standards. As soon as you start recladding that existing building, you're covering up the original history of the building, and it's game over for tax credits. So just a warning.
Just to let you know.
Just some advice.
So we're not making any decisions tonight. This is just a preliminary review. Is there any specific questions that any of like Jonah or Travis or the Longs, are you any specific questions or guidance you want from us before we move on tonight? Because like I said, we can't make any decisions. We're just here kind of talking through your plan. And I think you kind of have a feel for where we are on it.
No, and understand, obviously, I appreciate the process of this preliminary hearing to be able to have this out because obviously the challenge of is being able to present you guys with a very clear decision on approval is what our aim is. And appreciate Andy and Mike and their guidance through this process. So it's important to us to be able to get this feedback and to get a good understanding of kind of where your guys's interpretations of the guidelines and everything like that, so that we are well prepared for the June meeting.
Well, I mean, I'm super excited about this project. I know we're kind of stuck on this one issue here, but I mean, I really look forward to seeing your application next month. I think you guys are doing great work. So any other final comments or questions before we move on from this topic? Patty,
So since everybody else has put their 2 cents in worth, I'm going to throw my 2 cents in too. I'm super excited about this project and you guys taking that on. I remember the first time I walked in there, I thought it was going to be a really cool place to put people. I worked at an adventure company and I walked in and went, no. And I turned right around and went back out. So I'm super excited to see that it'll be a functioning part of our community. I'm kind of torn between the two options. I think option one looks more aesthetically pleasing to a certain sense, but then option B, like Tim and Chris keep telling us, it tells a story, even if it's a convoluted story. I lived in a little house up on Virginia that was a shotgun house, And 25 years later, they decided to build on a bedroom. Well, you know, they didn't add any heat or anything like that. They just built another room on there. So I think there are a lot of places in Idaho Springs where that happens, but you don't see it. Because if you walked around this house, you'd never guess that that was an addition. So I'm kind of like Rick, I'm torn between the two, but I tend to kind of let's stick more with the history. And even though it's a convoluted story, again, it's a talking point. And I never knew part of this history. So I'm finding it fascinating that, you know, they built that on and they moved this other cottage, and I didn't know that. That's awesome to know that. And if you put that into the lodge, it's going to help people understand how complicated history can be and the different things that affected and what different decades did in their building and how they just kind of schlepped stuff together to make it work. And I think that's an interesting fact right there. So before I start rambling, that's my 2 cents worth.
Thank you, Patty.
And thank you for that. Thank you for that, Patty. That speaks to our level of excitement that, yes, there is a lot of story to tell of this building. It tells a lot of the story of Idaho Springs and the mining history and the meetings that have been held in that lodge. So we're excited about being part of that. We're excited about bringing that to be a contributing part of the community and partnering with a lot of the businesses there in Minor Street and in Idaho Springs so that our guests can have what I would consider one of the more unique experiences and pleasant experiences when they come to Colorado.
Well, thank you all for coming here tonight and answering our questions and listening to us ramble on. And like I said, I'm really excited to see your application next month and just see where this is going to go, because it's a great building. And like Patty said, a lot of history that I never knew either. And I loved reading that today. So thank you so much for coming. We will see you next month. And I think the last thing on our agenda for tonight, was there any public comments? Nope. Okay. Then if we are good, our next meeting will be, would I say June 15th at 5:15, and I will adjourn this meeting at 6:32 p.m. Thank you, everybody. Have a really great night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Right.
Good night.